1 minute.
Minister, obviously there's no doubt we have to have the report on this particular case, and we will wait to ask you questions, and Minister Fitzgerald as well, about your knowledge of events. I'm particularly interested in whether Minister Fitzgerald knew about this case and knew what was happening at the time she was being questioned by the United Nations and said nothing about it and being condemned by the United Nations. But you are right, the constitutional ban on abortion is the problem. As long as a grown woman is equated with a fetus, that is a huge problem. That women are so degraded in this way by our constitution is the problem, and the ban has to go. Because as long as it's there, there can't be any humane provision of abortion in this country. Now, the referendums that are lined up to take place in the spring, including one on marriage equality, we could easily have a referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment on the same day as the marriage equality referendum. And in fact, it will be a double endorsement of progress in this country. It will be a signal to the rest of the world that the Catholic Church's writ doesn't run, despite the wishes of the majority in society. And it will be a hammer blow to the Catholic Church's domination of many areas of life in this country. The Rosa campaign and the Socialist Party deputies will be calling for a referendum to be held on the same day. It just makes absolute sense. If people are coming out to vote, this is a crucial topic that they'd like to have a say on, and the referendums could be held at that time.
I now call on the Minister to conclude.
Thanks. Look, there are a couple of things. First of all, I just want to say that I'm glad that we're all agreed that we're not discussing this individual case, because I think if it does transpire that one of the factors of this case, if it does turn out that this young woman's confidentiality was breached at some point, well, I think that's truly awful in its own right, if that turns out to be the case. And I really think that that it's wrong under any circumstances to jump to conclusions about any individual case until we know the facts. And one of the things that disappointed me about this case was hearing on the radio so many voices in the initial days saying so many things that were totally factually incorrect. And I heard that from both sides of the abortion debate and from a number of state-funded bodies who really, quite frankly, should know better in their utterances. Deputy Daly mentioned her original contribution, never again. And look, I understand where she's coming from in that regard. But the sad truth is, and this is the truth, it's never going to be possible to pass legislation that can prevent all tragedies related to pregnancy or abortion. Even if we had very liberal legislation, like they have in the United States or the UK, for example, we would still have the dilemma of late-term pregnancies, people who are 25, 26, 27 weeks pregnant seeking a termination. That does happen. That dilemma occurs in the United Kingdom all the time. Thankfully, it doesn't make the papers. In addition to that, even if we did have abortion on request in this country, we would then have the tragedy, of course, of people who can die as a result of a termination of pregnancy. That happens. Very rare, but it does happen. And people who are injured or lose their ability to reproduce in the future. All those things are rare, but they do happen. And I do hope one thing, that when we do have debates about this matter in this country, I hope that we don't shout each other down and interrupt each other, because the problem with this debate in this country, in my view, is that it's been dominated by the extremes, and it's framed in the Catholic versus anti-Catholic view of things rather than what's right and what's wrong. It's framed in terms of Christian ideology versus socialist ideology, being pro-life or anti-life, being pro-choice or anti-choice, as if you could ever reduce it to that, because human experience is not black and white. And medicine is not black and white either. So the idea that there's ever going to be perfect legislation that removes all tragedies related to pregnancy and abortion is just wrong, in my view. In relation to the 8th Amendment, again, people calling for the repeal of that need to consider what that means. Just repealing the 8th Amendment means deleting from the Constitution any protection of the life of the mother and the unborn, and replacing it with nothing. So people need to consider whether that's what they want, whether they want to replace it with a different amendment, for example. And even if you do change the Constitution, it doesn't change the legislation. The law actually wouldn't change at all. You would then need to legislate subsequently. And I think it would be a really bad idea in 2015, in the run-in to a general election, for us to have that kind of debate happening in that milieu, because we've been there before. That's exactly what happened in 1983. In the run-up to a general election, people were put in a position where they made commitments in the run-in to a general election that maybe they shouldn't have. So let's not repeat the mistake of 1983 and have all that again in 2015. There's a time and a place, I think, for a considered, non-ideological debate and conversation about this matter in this country, but it shouldn't be done on foot of a tragedy or a very hard case, and it shouldn't be done in the run-in to a general election.
Margaret, thank you, Minister. That concludes